Imagine this. You're sitting in a dimly lit room, surrounded by people you've known for years, family, friends, colleagues. Laughter echoes around you, smiles are exchanged, but beneath your own practiced grin, there's an ache you can't quite name. You nod, agree, accommodate. You make sure no one feels uncomfortable, no one feels judged. You are the one everyone relies on to keep the peace, to smooth over rough edges, to make things right. And yet, you feel like you're disappearing. It's subtle, almost imperceptible at first, the way you say yes when you mean no, the way your voice softens to avoid conflict, the way you contort yourself into whatever shape will make others, like you approve of you need you. And each time you do, something within you withers, shrinks, retreats further into the shadows. Until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you don't recognize the person staring back. A face sculpted by the expectations of others. A soul starving beneath the weight of its own suppression. But here's the paradox. The more you strive to be loved by everyone, the less you feel truly seen by anyone. The more you bend to accommodate, the more isolated and estranged you become, not only from others, but from yourself. Is this what they call connection? Or is it something far more insidious? A quiet self-betrayal masquerading as virtue? Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But why should that be terrifying? Why should authenticity feel like such a radical, almost dangerous act? Could it be that our relentless pursuit of approval is not a harmless social strategy, but a subtle form of self-destruction? A war we wage against our own psyche? You might tell yourself that being agreeable is harmless, that it's just the price of belonging in a complex, demanding society. But beneath that rationalization, there's another, more unsettling possibility. What if your desire to please everyone is, in fact, the very thing that is silently dismantling your sense of self? What if the cost of harmony is authenticity? And what happens when the need for approval overrides the need for truth? Think about the moments in your life when you swallowed your feelings to avoid upsetting someone, when you agreed to something you didn't believe in just to keep the peace, when you laughed at a joke that made your skin crawl, when you stayed silent while your inner voice screamed for you to speak. Were these simply moments of social grace, or were they fractures, small, almost imperceptible cracks in the foundation of your identity? Jung believed that the psyche is not merely a passive container of experiences, but a dynamic, evolving system striving for wholeness. Every compromise you make, every part of yourself you exile, in the name of being liked, is not forgotten. It is buried, pushed into the unconscious, where it festers as the shadow, the hidden repository of all the aspects of yourself you deem unacceptable. Over time, this repression doesn't just lead to vague feelings of dissatisfaction. It manifests in more profound ways: anxiety, depression, self-loathing, chronic indecision, and even physical illness. And yet, society rewards the agreeable, the compliant, the accommodating. From childhood, you are taught to be good, to be polite, to make others comfortable, to seek validation in their smiles and approval. But at what point does this social conditioning stop being adaptive and start becoming pathological? At what point does your mask become your prison? You may wonder, is it even possible to live authentically without alienating others? Without risking rejection, disapproval, or abandonment? Is there a way to be true to yourself and still belong? Or is the very idea of universal acceptance an illusion, a fantasy that keeps you chained to a life of quiet desperation? The question, then, is not whether pleasing everyone is sustainable. It is whether it is survivable. How long can you continue dividing yourself into fragments to fit the molds others create for you before you lose the thread of who you truly are? And more disturbingly, what happens when you realize that no one else is asking you to do this? You are the one demanding it of yourself. This is the hidden cost Jung hinted at, the silent price exacted by a society obsessed with appearances, and by individuals terrified of rejection. A cost that, if left unchecked, leads not only to psychological fragmentation, but to spiritual erosion. But what is the origin of this need? Why do so many people willingly sacrifice their authenticity on the altar of approval? What hidden forces are at play within our psyches, our cultures, our very biology that make people-pleasing not just common but almost inevitable? The answer lies deeper, beneath the surface of everyday politeness and social expectations. It is rooted in ancient survival mechanisms, philosophical dilemmas, and unconscious drives that have shaped human behavior for millennia. Let's descend further. Let's uncover the hidden psychological and philosophical roots of this invisible epidemic, shall we? You did not choose this burden consciously. It was woven into the very fabric of your being before you could speak, before you could even reason. From your earliest moments, you learned that approval brought safety, affection, and security, while disapproval risked rejection, punishment, or abandonment. The child does not know the difference between authentic expression and adaptive survival. It only knows what keeps love near and what drives it away. And so, piece by piece, you learn to disown parts of yourself. Your anger was bad. Your defiance was disrespectful. Your sadness made others uncomfortable. Your individuality, when it diverged too much from the norms of family or culture, was subtly discouraged. The price of belonging was the repression of your true nature. You learned to please first and to be real later, if ever. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation gone awry. Rather than integrating all parts of the self, including the shadow, the instinctual, irrational, and sometimes socially unacceptable aspects, you learned to split yourself in two, the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask you crafted to navigate the demands of the world, a composite of roles and behaviors, carefully designed to elicit approval and avoid rejection. But the shadow is everything you left behind, everything you banished because you believed it made you unlovable. But why did you believe that in the first place? Because society told you so. And not just society as an abstract entity, but specific systems of power, culture, religion, and economy that have, for centuries, cultivated compliance over authenticity. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote of this with scathing clarity in his critique of slave morality, a morality that elevates meekness, self-denial, and obedience as virtues, while condemning strength, self-assertion, and authenticity as dangerous or immoral. The compliant individual is easy to control. The agreeable person is unlikely to rebel. A population obsessed with being liked, with fitting in, with being seen as good, is a population that rarely questions authority or challenges the status quo. The need to please becomes not just a personal survival mechanism, but a social control strategy, replicated generation after generation under the guise of politeness, morality, and civility. But there is more. Evolutionary biology also plays its role. For most of human history, survival depended on inclusion within the tribe. Rejection could mean exile, and exile meant death. Thus, we are hardwired to seek acceptance, to modulate our behaviors in ways that secure social bonds. This instinctual drive, though once necessary for survival, now operates in an environment where exile is more symbolic than literal, yet no less psychologically devastating. Arthur Schopenhauer observed that human beings are driven by an insatiable will to live, an irrational striving that often manifests as an endless seeking of validation and affirmation from others. But this will, unchecked by self-awareness, becomes a source of suffering. It drives us to prioritize how we are perceived over who we actually are, to trade authenticity for approval, to value harmony over truth. And so the modern individual torn between an unconscious evolutionary imperative to be accepted, a culturally imposed morality of compliance, and a deeply repressed instinct for authenticity, finds themselves in a state of chronic inner conflict. Jung described this conflict as a failure of individuation, a stagnation of psychological development where the persona becomes over-identified with the self. You begin to believe that you are your mask, that your worth is determined by how much others like you, need you, or validate you. But beneath that mask, the shadow grows restless, whispering reminders of all that has been sacrificed for the illusion of acceptance. And yet, this entire dynamic often remains invisible. The person-pleaser is rarely aware that their actions are driven by fear rather than by love. They tell themselves they are just being nice, keeping the peace, avoiding unnecessary conflict. But what they are really avoiding is themselves, the messy, complex, contradictory, sometimes offensive parts of themselves that they fear will provoke rejection if revealed. Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of bad faith captures this perfectly. The self-deception that occurs when a person denies their own freedom and responsibility, instead choosing to live according to external definitions and roles. To please everyone is to live in bad faith, to surrender the existential burden of defining yourself, opting instead for the safer, more palatable roles assigned by others. But make no mistake, this is not harmless. Viktor Frankl, the existential psychologist and Holocaust survivor, warned of the existential vacuum, a state of inner emptiness that arises when one's life is governed by what others expect rather than by what one truly values. Frankl argued that meaning is not found through conformity, but through authentic engagement with one's own deepest convictions and desires. So why do so many remain trapped in this cycle of people-pleasing? Because the alternative authenticity feels dangerous. To assert your true self is to risk rejection, judgment, alienation. It is to confront the terrifying possibility that not everyone will like you, approve of you, or include you. And for many, this is a fate worse than death. But Carl Jung reminds us that what we fear most is often the very thing we most need. He wrote, "That which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate." In other words, the unexamined compulsion to please everyone does not simply go away. It manifests as chronic anxiety, relational dysfunction, depression, and a haunting sense that one's life is not truly one's own. This is the hidden problem, the root of the suffering that quietly permeates the lives of those who have never dared to ask themselves, what would it mean to stop pleasing everyone? Who would I be if I no longer lived for their approval? The very asking of this question is the beginning of awakening. But the answer requires a confrontation with the unseen forces shaping your behavior, an excavation of the layers of conditioning that have, for so long, masqueraded as personality. Before we can explore the consequences of this unseen compulsion, we must first acknowledge that it is not just a personal quirk, but a systemic, multidimensional force with deep psychological, philosophical, and cultural roots. Now that you have seen how this problem was constructed, are you ready to see what it costs? Let's go deeper into the unseen consequences of a life spent pleasing everyone. Imagine waking up every day to a life that looks perfect from the outside: stable relationships, professional success, social approval, yet inside, there's a gnawing hollowness, a quiet despair you can't quite explain. You've done everything right. You've been kind, agreeable, generous. You've been the person everyone could rely on. And yet, you feel invisible even to yourself, as if your own life has become a role in someone else's script. This is not just dissatisfaction. It is existential disintegration. Carl Jung warned of this exact predicament when he spoke of the consequences of over-identifying with the persona. The longer you wear the mask, the more brittle your sense of self becomes. At first, pleasing others feels like a choice, but eventually it becomes a compulsion, a reflex so automatic that you forget there was ever an alternative. You lose access to your authentic desires, your instinctual wisdom, your inner voice. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and instead perpetually ask, "What do they want from me?" This gradual estrangement from the self produces a unique form of psychological suffering, one that is difficult to name because it is so normalized. You may experience it as chronic fatigue, unexplained anxiety, or an ever-present sense of being overwhelmed. It is the exhaustion of maintaining a self that does not belong to you. Neuroscience helps explain this exhaustion. The human brain is a prediction machine, constantly assessing threats and rewards to ensure survival. When you are trapped in the cycle of people-pleasing, your brain remains in a near-constant state of hypervigilance, scanning for signs of disapproval, ready to adjust your behavior to avoid conflict. This is the neurobiological cost: elevated cortisol levels, sympathetic nervous system overactivation, and ultimately, burnout. But the consequences run even deeper. Pleasing everyone requires the systematic suppression of anger, frustration, and even joy when these emotions conflict with others' expectations. Over time, this emotional repression disconnects you from your own effective life. You no longer know what you feel, only what you should feel to maintain harmony. This can lead to what psychologists call alexithymia, the inability to identify and describe one's emotions, a condition that severely hampers intimacy, creativity, and authentic self-expression. Socially, you become a magnet for those who exploit your inability to set boundaries. Narcissists, manipulators, and emotional vampires are drawn to the people-pleaser like moths to flame, sensing the implicit promise: I will accommodate your needs at the expense of my own. Relationships become imbalanced, draining, even abusive, but you stay, because leaving would mean breaking the very pattern you've been conditioned to uphold, a belief that your worth is contingent upon your utility to others. And what of your dreams, your ambitions, your wild, untamed impulses? They wither quietly in the background, becoming the ghosts in the nursery. To borrow a term from psychoanalyst Selma Freyberg, the unspoken, unlived parts of yourself that haunt your waking life. Jung understood this as the shadow's revenge. What is repressed returns not as a conscious choice, but as symptoms, compulsions, addictions, and inexplicable mood swings. The more you deny your authentic self, the more you become susceptible to depression, anxiety disorders, and psychosomatic illnesses. On a societal level, the collective consequence of widespread people-pleasing is equally insidious. When vast numbers of individuals prioritize superficial harmony over authentic engagement, public discourse becomes sanitized, art becomes formulaic, and politics devolve into performance rather than genuine debate. We create a culture of compliance, polite, civil, but ultimately deadened. Real progress, innovation, and connection require friction, disagreement, and risk. But the people-pleaser avoids these like the plague, opting instead for safe, shallow exchanges that sustain appearances but starve the soul. Carl Jung observed that this avoidance of inner conflict projects itself outward as a fear of collective change. A society dominated by people-pleasers resists transformation because it fears the rupture of comfort, even when that comfort has become oppressive. Thus, the unseen consequence is not just personal malaise, but cultural stagnation. And yet, perhaps the most devastating consequence of all is this: you become alien to yourself. Philosopher Martin Heidegger called this state fallenness, a condition in which the individual becomes absorbed in the expectations and norms of the they, losing sight of their own authentic existence. You begin to live not from your inner truth, but from a script handed to you by family, culture, and society. Life becomes something that happens to you, not something you actively shape. This alienation is not always loud. Often, it is a quiet ache, a subtle but persistent sense that you are not fully alive. You find yourself longing for something, but you don't know what. You chase distractions, more work, more relationships, more accomplishments, believing that if you just do enough, give enough, please enough, you will finally feel whole. But the wholeness you seek cannot be found in the eyes of others. It exists only within, in the parts of yourself you have long since abandoned. And so the cycle continues. The more you seek external approval, the more disconnected you feel. The more disconnected you feel, the more you seek external approval to compensate for that inner void. But what if you stopped? What if you broke the cycle? This question is terrifying because it threatens to dismantle the entire architecture of your identity. If you are not the person who pleases everyone, then who are you? What remains when the mask is removed, the performance ended, the persona laid to rest? Carl Jung believed that confronting this question was the essential task of the second half of life, the process he called individuation. It is not a comfortable journey. It requires descending into the depths of the unconscious, confronting the shadow, and integrating the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime disowning. But it is the only path that leads to genuine wholeness. And yet, most never take this path. Most live and die within the confines of their personas, never realizing that their suffering was not an unavoidable fate, but a choice, an unconscious decision to trade authenticity for approval. But you are not most people. You are here, now, standing at the precipice of a different possibility. The possibility of reclaiming your life, of breaking free from the invisible chains that have kept you bound for so long. The question is, will you take the next step? Because to do so is to rebel not just against societal expectations, but against the very part of yourself that has long insisted that pleasing everyone is the key to being loved. Are you ready to meet the rebel within? Let's move forward into the rebellion and discover how to finally break free. Picture this. You standing in front of a mirror, not the kind that simply reflects your image, but one that exposes everything hidden beneath the surface. The mask you've worn for years begins to crack. Behind it, there is no chaos, no monstrous version of yourself as you feared, only someone real, raw, imperfect, and utterly human. This is the moment of rebellion, when you stop asking, how can I please them? And start asking, who am I, truly? This rebellion is not loud, not theatrical. It does not require you to burn bridges, abandon relationships, or shout your truth from the rooftops. It begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, with a single act, choosing authenticity over approval. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the courageous journey of integrating all aspects of the self, including the dark, messy, uncomfortable parts that you are taught to hide. Individuation is not about becoming who others expect you to be. It is about becoming who you already are beneath the layers of conditioning. But make no mistake, this is a radical act. To reclaim your authenticity is to defy the evolutionary, cultural, and psychological forces that have shaped your behavior for decades. It is to confront the primal fear of rejection and choose, instead, the possibility of true connection, not with everyone, but with those who can meet you as you are. Think of historical figures who embodied this rebellion. Socrates, who refused to conform to the moral complacency of Athens, choosing death over inauthenticity. Friedrich Nietzsche, who shattered conventional morality to affirm the necessity of creating one's own values. Even Carl Jung himself, who broke with Freud and endured professional exile in order to follow his own psychological and spiritual truth. Their lives remind us of an uncomfortable truth. Authenticity often comes at a cost. You may lose relationships built on the illusion of who you pretended to be. You may encounter resistance from those who benefited from your compliance. You may even feel isolated as you begin to differentiate between the roles you've played and the person you are becoming. But what you gain in return is priceless. Integrity, self-respect, freedom. So how do you begin this rebellion? How do you break free from the compulsive need to please everyone? First, you must learn to recognize the voice of the inner pleaser, that reflexive part of you that immediately asks, what will they think? Before you even know what you want. This voice often masquerades as morality, kindness, or duty, but underneath, it is driven by fear. Your task is not to silence this voice with aggression, but to meet it with curiosity and compassion. Ask it, whose approval am I seeking right now, and why do I believe I need it? Second, you must practice saying no not with cruelty, but with clarity. Every time you say no to something that does not align with your values or desires, you say yes to yourself. The first no will feel excruciating, as if you are violating some sacred code. But over time, you will realize that this boundary is not a rejection of others, but an affirmation of your own worth. Third, you must tolerate the discomfort that comes with authenticity. People may be disappointed when you stop playing the role they've come to expect. Some may withdraw their affection or approval. But here is where the rebellion becomes transformative. You realize that their reactions say more about their needs than about your value. You begin to discern the difference between love that is conditional dependent on your compliance and love that is unconditional, capable of embracing you as you are. Psychologist Carl Rogers called this the experience of unconditional positive regard, the foundation of all healing relationships. But before you can find this in others, you must first offer it to yourself. You must become the one who stops demanding that you be perfect, agreeable, or perpetually accommodating. You must give yourself permission to be whole. Fourth, you must embrace your shadow. All those parts of yourself that you've suppressed in the name of pleasing others, your anger, your ambition, your sensuality, your eccentricity, are not flaws but vital aspects of your humanity. Jung insisted that integrating the shadow is not optional but essential for psychological health. Until you reclaim these exiled parts, you will continue to live a fragmented life, ruled by the need for external validation. This is why shadow work journaling, therapy, dream analysis, creative expression is so crucial on this path. These practices allow you to bring unconscious material into awareness, to see yourself fully, and to choose how to act rather than being driven by automatic patterns of people-pleasing. Finally, you must redefine what it means to belong. The people-pleaser believes that belonging requires fitting in, adapting, and earning approval. But authentic belonging, as Brené Brown eloquently puts it, is about being part of something without having to change who you are. It requires vulnerability, the willingness to show up as your true self, even when that self is messy, flawed, or different. And here is the paradox at the heart of this rebellion. When you stop trying to please everyone, you may lose superficial connections, but you create the conditions for deeper, more meaningful relationships to emerge. People will begin to see you, not the mask, not the role, but the real you. Some will walk away, but those who stay will offer a kind of connection that is rare and precious. Acceptance without conditions. Carl Jung believed that this journey of becoming whole was not just a personal task, but a collective necessity. He warned that individuals who fail to confront their shadow and reclaim their authenticity contribute to the collective neurosis of society, a world filled with compliant, anxious, disconnected individuals who perpetuate systems of oppression and stagnation. But those who undertake this rebellion, who dare to live authentically, become what Jung called individuated beings. They are capable of offering the world something it desperately needs, not more compliance, but more consciousness, not more superficial harmony, but more genuine human connection. So now you stand at the threshold of this rebellion. You can continue to live within the confines of your persona, seeking approval, avoiding conflict, and quietly suffering. Or you can take the risk, step into the unknown, and reclaim your life. The choice is yours. But before you decide, there is one final truth you must confront, the ultimate realization that will forever alter how you see yourself, your relationships, and the very nature of reality. Shall we cross that final threshold together? Now, imagine this. You've stripped away the mask, rejected the roles, and silenced the compulsive voice whispering that your worth is determined by the approval of others. You are standing in the center of your life, naked, vulnerable, and real. There is no applause, no validation, no crowd affirming your choice, only the quiet hum of your own existence. And here, at last, the ultimate truth reveals itself. You never needed their approval to be whole. This is the paradox that Carl Jung illuminated through his life's work, that the very thing you've been chasing all along, the acceptance, the love, the sense of worth, was never out there, never contingent on the reactions or opinions of others. It has always been within you, waiting for you to stop running, stop pleasing, stop performing, and simply turn inward. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But this privilege is not bestowed by others. It is claimed by you through the painful but liberating act of self-acceptance. To realize that you are already enough, not because you've pleased others, not because you've lived up to their expectations, but simply because you exist, is the final, most powerful revelation. This is not a feel-good platitude, but a psychological and spiritual revolution. It dismantles the entire structure of the people-pleaser's identity. It reveals that the years spent contorting yourself, compromising your values, and fragmenting your soul in pursuit of approval were founded on an illusion that your worth is conditional. It never was. But this realization is destabilizing at first. Without the constant striving for approval, who are you? Without the endless calibrating of your behavior to match what others want, what remains? What remains is your authentic self-flawed, complex, contradictory, and beautiful beyond measure. This is what Jung meant by wholeness. Not perfection, not moral purity, not universal likability, but the integration of all parts of yourself, the light and the dark, the noble and the base, the gentle and the fierce. Wholeness is the acceptance of your totality, without judgment or exclusion. And here's the most haunting, yet liberating aspect of this truth. Not everyone will love the real you, and that's okay. In fact, that's necessary. You were never meant to belong to everyone. The attempt to be universally loved is not only impossible, it is dehumanizing. It requires you to erase your uniqueness, to dilute your truth, to amputate parts of yourself, to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. The fear of rejection that has kept you trapped in the cycle of people-pleasing was always based on a misunderstanding that rejection is a verdict on your worth, rather than a reflection of compatibility. The real tragedy is not that some people will reject you. The real tragedy is that you might reject yourself to prevent that possibility. But once you grasp the ultimate truth, that your worth is intrinsic, that your value does not fluctuate based on how others see you, you become free in a way few ever experience. Free to say no, free to disappoint, free to be disliked, and most importantly, free to be fully, unapologetically yourself. This freedom is not without its costs. It may mean losing relationships that were predicated on your compliance. It may mean enduring loneliness as you recalibrate your sense of belonging. It may mean standing alone in moments when conformity would have been easier. But what you gain eclipses what you lose. You gain authenticity, which is the foundation of true intimacy. Only when you show up as you are can others truly see you, know you, and love you, not for the role you play, but for the person you are. You gain integrity, the alignment between your inner truth and outer behavior, which brings peace that no amount of external validation can offer. You gain sovereignty over your life, reclaiming the power you once outsourced to the whims of others. Carl Jung believed that the integration of the shadow, the confrontation with one's unconscious drives, and the reclamation of authenticity were not just personal milestones, but spiritual acts. They connect you to something larger than yourself, a sense of purpose, meaning, and transcendence. In breaking free from the compulsion to please, you step into what Jung might call the self with a capital S, the totality of your being, harmonized and whole. This is not the end of your psychological journey, but the beginning of a new one, where you are no longer driven by fear, but guided by inner truth. And here's the final paradox. When you stop trying to please everyone, you don't become isolated, you become magnetic. Your authenticity attracts those who resonate with your true self, not the facade you used to present. Your life becomes filled with relationships rooted in mutual respect and genuine connection, not obligation or performance. But this transformation cannot occur until you face the most difficult question of all. Are you willing to be disliked in order to be free? Most will hesitate here, balk at the risk, and retreat into the safety of their persona. But for those who dare to answer yes, a different kind of life awaits, a life of depth, courage, authenticity, and meaning. So now you stand here, at the conclusion of this long and winding path, faced with a simple but profound choice. Continue sacrificing your authenticity for approval, or step into the raw, beautiful, terrifying reality of being fully, unapologetically yourself. Carl Jung left us with this haunting reminder. The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. But perhaps the greatest tragedy of all is the unlived life of the self, the life forfeited in the relentless quest to be what others want you to be. You do not have to repeat that tragedy. You can choose something different. You can choose to rebel. You can choose to reclaim your life. And you can choose, finally, to live not as a reflection of others' expectations, but as the radiant, complex, magnificent being you have always been. The hidden cost of pleasing everyone is your life. The reward for breaking free is everything. The choice is yours. If this spoke to something deep within you, make sure to subscribe for more insights on psychology, self-growth, and authentic living. And if this message empowered you, leave a like. It lets us know these ideas matter and helps others find them too. Keep going. Your true self is worth it.